Okay, everybody got that? If I give you something that you don't have, logic says, well, then that means I'm going to have less of what I did have, and you're going to have more of what you didn't have. Now, if that's true, and it seems logically that is true, then there's no way you're more blessed if you give than it is if you receive. But the monkey wrench that's in all this is what Jesus said. Because if what Jesus said is true, if between the blessing of giving and the blessing of receiving, the blessing of giving is greater than the blessing of receiving, then therein lies a principle that we need to learn today, and I want you to write this down. This is one of those biggies. In fact, this is one of those, you ever hear a preacher say something and you say, that doesn't go in the paper, that goes in the front of the Bible. This is one of those front of the Bible statements, okay? If what Jesus said is true, then giving does not take from you what you should not have. It gives to you what you would never have if you did not give. And by the way, I'm not talking about money primarily today. I mean, that money's a part of it. I'm talking a lot more about money. But if what Jesus said is true, logically doesn't make sense, I understand, but if it's more blessed to give than it is to receive, then evidently, in some strange way, giving does not take from you what you should not have. It gives to you what you would never have if you did not give. Now, I thought through what Jesus said, and I asked myself a question that if I were you, I'd be asking. How is it more blessed to give than it is to receive? How in the world can giving leave you better off than getting? Or to ask it, and I think this is the best way to ask it, what does giving give you that getting never does? What is it about giving that gives me something that if I didn't give, I would never have? And as I begin to study the Scripture and I begin to listen back to what Jesus talked about, because Jesus talked about giving more than any other topic, more than heaven, more than hell, he talked about giving. And I went back and I just kind of said, okay, let me just play this tape over again in my mind. And I discovered 3 things that giving does for you that getting doesn't. And 3 reasons why Jesus said the truth when he said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. And I just want to share those with you this morning. So if you'll just turn over the back of your order of worship, you can just kind of fill in these blanks, all right? Here's what Jesus said. He said, number 1, giving gives you the opportunity to accept the greatest invitation. It gives you the opportunity to accept the greatest invitation. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. Most of us in this room have probably already prayed sometime today. I would dare say that some of the, coming to church or when you first got up or over your, when you ate breakfast, whatever it is, some of us, most of us, probably 99% of us, we have already said some kind of a prayer this morning. And there's one prayer that you and I have in common more than any other prayer. As a matter of fact, I bet you, there's one prayer that you and I have prayed more than every other prayer put together that we have ever prayed in our lifetime. And it's a prayer that basically has 2 words in it. And the words are, Lord, bless. Why is it that instinctively we pray that prayer more than any other prayer? And we may pray it several times a day. Well, let me tell you why it's so easy to pray that prayer. Because instinctively, nobody taught us this. We just grew up knowing this. Instinctively, we know there is absolutely nothing greater in this life than to have the blessing of God. I mean, think about it. If God is the greatest force in the world, and we believe that he is, well, if God is the greatest force in the world, then the blessing of God ought to be greater than any other blessing. I mean, it makes sense to me. If you said to me, is there anything greater this church could have than to have the blessing of God on it? Well, no. Is there anything my marriage could have that would be greater than to have the blessing of God on my marriage? Absolutely not. Is there anything greater your business could have, or your finances could have, or even your health could have, than to have the blessing of God? All right, in light of that, listen to the words again. It is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, I want you to, we're going to just think as logically as we can this morning. There is a blessing in receiving. Jesus didn't say it's blessed to give, it's not blessed to receive. He didn't say that. He said it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Obviously, sure, there's a blessing in receiving. I mean, you receive an unexpected inheritance or a gift out of the blue. Well, that can really help when you got bills to pay. You get a scholarship to college. You get a tax refund. Somebody else picks up the check in the restaurant. I mean, those are all blessings, and it's a fine thing to get. And yet Jesus said, I don't care what you get. I don't care how much you get. I don't care how big you get. There's always a bigger blessing in giving than there is in receiving. So do you know what giving really is? Giving is the invitation that God gives you to get in on His greatest blessing. That's what it is. Every time God asks you to give, and by the way, not just money, time, talent, resources, abilities, encouragement, hope, help. Every time God asks you to give anything, He is simply inviting you to get in on His greatest blessing. Because when God invites you into the land of giving, it is not to take something from you. He invites you into the land of giving so He can give you something that otherwise you would never get any other way. Let me give you a couple of practical illustrations. Giving is the only antidote and is the only cure I know to some of the most serious psychological and spiritual diseases that people have, for which there is no other cure. And I'm just going to give you just two examples. Now, don't raise your hand. I'm not trying to put anybody on a guilt trip, but just be honest with yourself. God already knows the truth anyway. Don't need to lie about it. And nobody's going to know but you and God. First question. Do you have a problem with greed? Now, before you answer that question, if you have crushing credit card debt, you've got a problem with greed. Do you have a problem with wanting more? Are you addicted to shopping? You're addicted to buying. You want to continually accumulate things even though you don't need them. You say, boy, you have hit me right between the eyes. All right, can I ask you a question? Do you know how to be freed from greed? There's only one way to be freed from greed: giving. That's the only thing that works. Nothing else will work. Giving frees you from greed. All right, I've got another question. Do you have a problem with selfishness? Do you have a problem with sharing with other people? What is the antidote? How do you get free from selfishness? You give. God is a giver. And all giving is giving is God's way of inviting you to say, it's God's way of saying, hey, you want to be like me? Well, yes, Lord, I do. You want to behave like me? Yes, Lord, I do. All right, then you got to be a giver. Because let's think about this. Why are you here today? Because God chose to give you life. God didn't know you another heartbeat. God didn't know you another breath in your... You could have died last night. So you're here today. Why? Because God gave you life. Why is this world still here today? Why is the world still standing? Because God in His grace chose to give this world another day of existence. We have this incredible opportunity to be guaranteed that when we die, we'll go to heaven. How do we get that opportunity? Because God chose to give His Son for our sins, and through His Son, eternal life. Now, if you're sitting there and you're like me, you're an accounting major, or you work with finances, or you handle the money in your household, or you're a bottom line thinker, some of you are sitting there and you're going, nice try, nice shot, I'm not buying what you're selling. I still know. Giving takes away what I have, and getting is the only way to go. I don't care what you say. Well, before you really settle there, write down the second statement. And that is, giving gives you the opportunity to make the greatest investment. Now, you won't hear what I'm about to tell you from your typical financial advisor. You won't hear this from your banker. You won't hear this from your accountant. You won't hear this from your tax consultant. But I want you to listen to what Jesus said. He said, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now I want you to listen carefully to what Jesus said. This is such an incredible statement. Jesus was talking about our stuff. All the stuff that we accumulate, and all the stuff that we buy, and all the stuff that we store, and all the stuff that we shelve, and all the stuff that we have, and all the stuff that we keep. He says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. Well, why shouldn't we? Well, it's not because earthly treasures are bad. There's nothing wrong with earthly treasures. There's nothing wrong with having a nice home. There's nothing wrong with having a nice car. There's nothing wrong with having nice furniture. There's nothing wrong with having stuff. The problem is stuff doesn't last. Stuff is temporary. You take everything that you own right now, or let me just say this. Take everything that you think you own. For example, you think you own your house. I got news for you. In 100 years, somebody else is going to own your house. You think you own that car? No, somewhere down the road, somebody else is going to own that car. You take everything that you've worked on, everything you're working for right now, one of two things is going to happen to everything you've got, everything I've got. One of two things is always going to happen to it. Number one, you're going to lose it. Or number two, you're going to leave it. You're either going to lose it, it's going to rot, depreciate, fall apart, become obsolete, stolen, broken, or destroyed, or burned up, or you're going to leave it. You're going to die, and you're not going to take it with you. So Jesus said, hey, don't store up stuff. Don't put all your eggs in the earthly treasure basket. It's not going to last. That's why he gives us this alternative. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Now here's the key. You do not store up in heaven by getting. You only store up in heaven by giving. Receiving, you get treasures on earth. Giving, you get treasures in heaven. Now, I want to give you this illustration, and this illustration is not original with me. Let me just say this. Normally, I milk a lot of cows, turn my own butter. Okay, but this illustration, I read this in a book by one of my favorite authors, and I'm telling you, I said that's one of the greatest. I've got to share that with my people at the right time. So this is not my illustration, not original, but it's a great illustration. I want you to go back 150 years. And I want you to imagine that you're living at the end of the Civil War, okay? Now, you're living in the South. Keep this in mind. You're living in the South, but you're actually from the North. You just kind of moved to the South just for a little while, but your permanent home is in the North. And as soon as the war is over, you're planning to move back to the North because that's where your home is, all right? Now, while you're in the South, I want you to imagine that you have accumulated all of this Confederate currency. I'm holding in my hand right now a $1,000 Confederate bill, okay? So you've accumulated all this Confederate currency. You got all this Confederate money at your house. But I also want you to imagine that you've got some inside information. You know who's going to win. You know the North is going to win the war. And you know the Confederacy is going to collapse. All right? Everybody with me, right? Question. So what would you do with all this Confederate money? Well, if you're smart, you'd say, I know what I'd do. I'd take all that Confederate money and I'd exchange it for United States money. Well, now, why would you do that? Because you know pretty soon, what's that going to be worth? Nothing. This is going to be worth a lot. This is not going to be worth anything. So if you're smart, like I am, you'd cash all of that in for this. Because the only money that's going to have any value when the war's over is not this, but it's this. So what you do, if you're really smart, you'd say, I'm going to keep just enough of that to keep me alive till I can get back home, but everything I really don't need, I'm going to exchange for this. All right, now ready? I got some inside information I want to give you. This world is not your home. You're just passing through here. You just living here temporarily. And one way or the other, you're checking out of here. You're either going to leave here when you die, or if you live long enough, Jesus Christ is going to come back and he's going to take you to your real home. And the point is, this world and all the stuff that we've accumulated is not going to last forever, and neither are you. And what you have on this earth, you're either going to lose it or you're going to leave it. However, Jesus said, whatever you leverage, whatever you exchange, every time you exchange this for this, Jesus said, you're investing treasure in heaven. So in other words, whatever you give to Jesus, whatever you give to a Bible-believing, evangelistic, mission-minded church, whatever you give that somehow invests in the souls and the lives of other people is going to last forever. And the point I'm telling you is this. Do you know why God gives you all of this in your lifetime? to learn how to exchange it for that. He doesn't give you that so you can say, let me just see how much of that I can accumulate. He says, no, that's not why I give you that. I'm giving you that so you can leverage it and exchange it for this, because I want you to take this Confederate money, that represents all your earthly stuff. I want you to take this and I want you to exchange it for this. The famous missionary Jim Elliot, who was killed by the Auca Indians down in South America, giving his life to preach the gospel. Jim Elliot made outside the Bible what is the greatest statement I've ever heard anybody make in my entire life. It's number one on my list. Here's what he said. And I want you to keep it up there for about a minute. Listen to this. I'm going to read it very slowly. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Let that linger in the air for a minute. He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. I've got good news for you. You're a bottom line thinker like I am. I got good news for you. Jesus was a bottom line thinker. He's arguing from the bottom line. He says, okay, let's just go to the bottom line. It's better to give than it is to receive. Not because it's the right thing to do. It's better than that. He said it's the smart thing to do. Because you're taking what you cannot keep, what you're going to leave, what you're going to lose, and investing it what you can keep that you can never lose. You can't take it with you, Jesus said, but you can send it on ahead, and the way you send it on ahead is by giving and investing in people and things that are going to heaven. Listen to these verses, 1 Timothy 6:18 through 19. Listen to this. Give happily to those in need, always being ready to share whatever God has given you. By doing this, you will be storing up real treasures for yourself in heaven. Now listen to this last statement. It is the only safe investment for eternity. So here's the last thing. Giving gives you the opportunity to have the greatest influence. Jesus said this, and this is another one of those, you got to be kidding verses to me. Give, and it will be taken from you. You say, that's not what it says, but no, that's what a lot of you think. A lot of you think every time the preacher talks about giving, well, here we go, hold on to your wallet, chain it up, here it comes, trying to get what I got. Wrong. Jesus said give, and what? You read it out loud. What? And what? Say it a little louder. Really? Give. It'll be given to, and then it's like he says, you know what? Let me go a little further. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, poured into your lap. For with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. Now, isn't that interesting? Are you ready for this? You're talking about mind-boggling. Jesus said, hey, giving does not prevent you from getting. Giving is the only way to getting. You don't give to get, but when you give, you get. Remember what we said earlier? Giving does not take from you what you should not have. It gives to you what you would never have if you did not give. And Jesus said, the more you give, the more you give back. The more you give out, the more that comes back to you. Now, let me ask you a question. Why is that true? Because it doesn't sound logical. Why is that true? All right, let me tell you why it has to be true. Pop quiz. Who is the greatest giver in the universe? God. Everybody agree with that? God's the greatest giver in the universe. All right, listen to me carefully. That's a title he won't give up. That's a title he's not going to relinquish to anybody. You are not going to outgive God. He will never ever say, well, you win. You get the title. You're the champ. God says, oh no. You will never outgive me. It is a law that you cannot break. And by the way, that's true universally. Listen, anytime you give everything, time, encouragement, friendship, you always get more of it back. Proverbs 11:25 says, a generous man will prosper. He who refreshes others will himself be refreshed. I've seen this in my life. If you give encouragement, you'll get encouraged. You'll get more encouraged. If you give a blessing, you'll get a bigger blessing. If you give friendship, you'll get more friends. Now, let me just tell you this. Your bottom line. I'm a bottom line guy. This is a bottom line message. Let's just get bottom line. Somebody tell me, I've asked you this before, what does the term ROI mean? Somebody tell me. Return on investment, right? Now, you've got a right to ask this question. Okay, Pastor, suppose I decide to take you up on your challenge. Suppose I'm buying what you're selling today, and I decide in every way I can imagine, I'm going to really start majoring on giving. Question. If I decide to take up the offer that Jesus is making here, and I decide to become a giver, I decide I'm going to believe what he says, and I'm going to change my whole attitude toward giving and getting. I'm going to reverse what I've always thought. Instead of trying to become a getter, which causes credit card debt, unnecessary consumer spending, selfishness, and greed off the chart, I'm going to change my way. I'm going to start majoring on giving rather than getting. You have every right to ask this question, and I would ask it for you. So what's my ROI if I decide to do that? Well, let me let Jesus answer the question. Jesus said in Matthew 19, verse 29, and everyone who has left houses or brothers or sisters or father or mother or children or fields for my sake will receive 100 times as much and will inherit eternal life. I promise you the ROI, the return on your investment will be amazing, and God will use your giving to accomplish unbelievable things. So I want you to listen to this story that I'm going to share, and we'll wrap up. I never told this before to you, I don't think. It's one of my all-time favorite stories. I love this story. It's a story about a monk, a very simple living monk. And he was traveling down the road one day, and he saw something gleaming in the bushes, and he went over and picked it up, and it was an unbelievably precious stone. It was a jewel that he instantly recognized was worth a tremendous amount of money. And so he kept it. He put it in his knapsack. Well, one day a traveler came by. He was very hungry, and he said to the monk, "Have you got anything to eat?" And the monk said, "Sure." And he opened up his bag to share some food with him. And when he did, the traveler saw that jewel down in the bag. And he said to that monk, he said, "Excuse me," he said, "do you know what that is that's in your knapsack?" And he said, "Yes." "Do you know how valuable that is?" He said, "Yes." "Do you know how much money you could sell that for?" He said, "Yes." Well, then on a whim, he said, "Would you give it to me?" And to his shock, without any hesitation, the monk said, sure. He reached in his knapsack and gave it to him. He said, just like that? He said, sure, you want it, you can have it. Man, that traveler departed. He was so overjoyed with this unexpected gift. He thought to himself, man, I have struck the mother lode. I am financially secure for the rest of my life. I am rich. I'll never have to worry about anything else again. Well, a few days later, he came back looking for that monk. When he found him, he reached into his pocket, pulled that jewel out, gave it back to the monk and said, you rascal, you. The monk said, what? You know how valuable that stone is? He said, yes. You know how much more money that stone was worth? He said, absolutely. You rascal, you. He said, what are you talking about? He said, I want you to give me something, and you've got it far more precious than that stone. And the monk said, are you